I was already on my feet, already walking, already beginning to cry with something close to relief, when the hand closed around my wrist and pulled me to a stop. Elise. Her face was inches from mine and her eyes told me everything before her voice did. Don't touch that folder. You're taking the fall. For seconds earlier, Gareth Bright, the chief executive of Stratton Group, had smiled at me from the front of the packed quarterly meeting and announced, in front of 60 colleagues, that after years of sacrifice and dedication, I was finally being promoted. The room had erupted. My name is Juno Bennett. 36 years old. Senior financial analyst. 9 years of missed weekends, cancelled plans, and the kind of quiet loyalty that holds a company together while other people take the credit. I am telling you this because those 60 people were still applauding when the doors at the back of the room opened. Subscribe now and leave a comment. I need you to stay until the very end. 2 government auditors walked in carrying printed financial records. My name was on every page. Before I could speak, the head of human resources pressed a folder against my chest. Inside, a suspension notice dated 2 days earlier, a fraud allegation citing £430,000, and a written confession I had never produced. I looked at the transfer timestamp. 8:47 that morning. The meeting had begun at 8:30. I had been standing in front of 60 witnesses at the exact second the money had left the account. Gareth Bright took one slow, deliberate step away from me. Security was already waiting at my workstation when I got back to my desk. My monitor was locked. A printed notice confirmed that all system access had been revoked with immediate effect. I had been suspended before the applause in that room had even finished. As I gathered my belongings, people filmed me. Not openly. Through gaps in partitions, reflected in dark screens. The particular silent surveillance of people who want to be able to describe what they witnessed later. I kept my eyes forward. I did not hurry. I would not give them that. In the lift, the doors had barely closed before my phone vibrated. A text from Elise. They planned this weeks ago. Check the timestamps on the approval documents. I opened the folder in the lobby. The 4 fraud approval documents were at the back. Each one bore my digital authorization stamp. Each one carried a precise timestamp. I read through every line. The first transfer, approved at 8:47. I was in the boardroom. The second, 8:51. Still in the boardroom. The third, 9:04. Still visible to 60 colleagues. The fourth, 9:11. My removal from the stage had not yet been demanded. Every fraudulent transfer had been authorized during the exact window in which I had the most unimpeachable alibi available. This was not carelessness. This was not a coincidence. Someone had chosen that window on purpose. At home, I opened the company's cloud archive I was authorized to access as part of my analyst role. The transfer records were still there. For now. I had spent 9 years as a financial analyst. I knew what to look for. Digital authorization in Stratton Group's system used a login certificate unique to each employee's credentials, tied to a specific registered device. If someone had approved those transfers using my identity, there would be a device identifier that didn't match mine. There was. The certificate was a perfect copy, identical in every visible field. But the device that generated it was different. Someone had replicated my credentials exactly, not approximately, and had used them from a separate terminal. I filtered the approval logs by originating device. The same device appeared 4 times. Executive Terminal 7. I pulled the internal network directory and searched for the terminal assignment. The result appeared immediately. Executive Terminal 7 was registered to Gareth Bright's private office. The man who had smiled and announced my promotion that morning. The man who had stepped away from me without a single word. I reached for my phone to capture a screenshot. I pressed the button. The connection died. The file vanished. The entire transfer log was deleted from the external archive, remotely, in real time, while I was looking directly at it. I sat in the silence of my kitchen and understood something that made my blood run cold. Whoever was watching the company's servers was not just watching the data, they were watching me. I drove to the Stratton Group car park at 7:10 the following morning. There was one person at that company I still trusted. Gerald Mercer, the chief financial officer, had mentored me through my first year as an analyst. He had written the reference letter that shaped my career. More than once, he had told me I was the most methodical thinker in the building. I needed to know if that man was part of what had been done to me. I was standing beside his car when he arrived. He stopped dead when he saw me. His eyes moved immediately to the security camera above the entrance barrier, then to the one on the wall to his left. 2 cameras. He tracked both in one sweep, the way someone does when they are frightened of being observed. He did not speak. "Gerald. I need 5 minutes," I said quietly. He walked past me without meeting my eyes. "You do not understand how large this is." His voice was barely audible, directed at the wall in front of him, and then, without breaking stride, without looking toward me, without any gesture the cameras might register, he pressed something cold and flat into my hand. A mobile phone. Cheap, unbranded, already loaded with a pay-as-you-go SIM. He was through the entrance barrier before the nearest camera had completed its rotation. I looked down at the device in my palm. Gerald had been carrying this for me. Which meant he had known I would come. Which meant he had been expecting this moment long before I had. The burner phone held a single text message, an address on an industrial estate on the eastern edge of the city, a unit number, and a 4-digit entry code. No name. No explanation. The message had been sent the previous evening at 11:43 hours before I had approached Gerald in that car park. Hours before I had even decided to find him. He had anticipated my every move. The storage unit was at the end of a row of corrugated steel doors. Inside, 3 boxes of shredded documents emptied across the concrete floor, 2 unmarked external hard drives on a shelf, a set of vendor contracts tucked beneath a split cardboard panel. I pulled on gloves before touching anything. In the center of the shelf, positioned between the 2 hard drives as if placed there deliberately, was a printed document inside a clear plastic sleeve. I read the header. Operational containment following Juno Bennett termination. A distribution list of 6 names. Gareth Bright headed it. I forced myself to keep reading. A timeline. A communication strategy. A section titled Regulatory Deflection with my name listed as the primary measure. And at the bottom of the first page, almost as an afterthought, the document's creation date. The plan to destroy me had been written 8 weeks before Gareth Bright stood at that podium and called me exceptional. 8 weeks. While I had been sitting at my desk, doing my job. While I had been loyal. I called Elise from the burner that evening. She answered on the 4th ring, immediately alert, no pause, the way someone does when they have been sitting with their phone in their hand, waiting for a call they are afraid to receive. She had been looking for the right moment to tell me, she said. There had never been a right moment. 6 weeks earlier, she had stayed late at the office. On her way back from the printer room, she had slowed as she passed the glass-walled meeting room on the 4th floor. 3 senior executives were inside on a conference call. One of them turned slightly and the table speaker projected toward the door. She heard my name. She heard clean authorization window. She heard no reasonable grounds to contest the trial. She went home and spent 2 days convincing herself she had misunderstood. Then Human Resources called her in for what they described as a welfare conversation. A senior manager mentioned, without an obvious connection to anything, that her mother's private healthcare provision was tied directly to her performance appraisals and her continued employment. Elise had understood immediately. She said it in the flat, steady voice of someone who has carried something frightening for too long. I am so sorry. They needed someone the auditors would believe was guilty without question. Someone with access. Someone everyone respected. Someone nobody would suspect. A pause. They needed you specifically, Juno, because everybody in that building trusted you completely. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. The thing they had used against me was the thing I had spent 9 years building. Elise had one more thing to give me. An audio file. 41 seconds long. Recorded at an executive dinner she had attended before she understood what she had walked into. She had held it for weeks, uncertain whether sending it would protect me or simply place us both in greater danger. She sent it anyway. I sat in the storage unit with a strip light buzzing above me and pressed play. Cutlery, laughter, wine being poured. Then my line manager's voice, unhurried, comfortable, the voice of a man who felt entirely safe. She will never see it coming. She still thinks loyalty means something here. Laughter from around the table. A second voice, one I could not immediately place. What if she pushes back? What if she starts looking at the approvals? A pause. The sound of a glass being set down. She won't have anything left to fight with. I listened to it 3 times. Not because I needed to understand it. Because I owed it to myself to feel the full weight of what it meant. 3 years I had worked for that man. 3 years of competence, discretion, and complete professional reliability. And somewhere during those 3 years, he had looked at everything I was, the dedication, the precision, the institutional knowledge, and seen only the shape of a trap he could build around me. That was what my reliability had been worth. That was what my loyalty had bought me. By the 3rd day, I understood why every element of what had happened had been so precisely timed. Working from the hard drives in the storage unit, I found internal correspondence archived away from the primary server, emails, procurement records, scheduling confirmations from the previous 4 months. Stratton Group was days away from closing a government defense contract worth close to £2 billion. The tender had been submitted 8 weeks earlier. The evaluation period closed at the end of the week. The fraud allegation against me had been designed to land before that deadline. If a fraud investigation became public before the contract was signed, the government procurement office would suspend the evaluation automatically pending an independent audit. The contract would collapse. The board would be left exposed with no cover story and no one to point at. They needed a scapegoat. Not eventually. Before the end of the week. And the scapegoat needed to be credible enough that investigators would focus entirely on the individual rather than on the institution. Someone trusted. Someone with access. Someone whose suspension would look like the company taking decisive, responsible action rather than concealing the truth. The promotion ceremony, the auditors, the folder pressed into my hands in front of 60 witnesses, every element had been designed not just to remove me but to publicly perform my guilt before I could say a single word in my own defense. The timing was not incidental to the plan. I was the timing. They had spent 8 weeks building the cage. Then they had opened the door and called it a promotion. I spent the following day tracing where the money had actually gone. The £430,000 had moved fast, 3 rapid transfers to holding accounts registered to companies I did not recognize. I worked through the public incorporation records methodically. 2 companies were registered in jurisdictions that don't disclose beneficial ownership. The third was domestic, incorporated 18 months earlier. Its listed director shared a surname with Gareth Bright's brother-in-law, identified in an industry conference program attached to one of the archived emails. Bright had been directing company funds toward his own family. The fraud he was pinning on me was money he had already stolen. But that was not the worst of what I found. Beneath the financial records were internal safety evaluation reports covering industrial components that Stratton Group supplied to infrastructure clients across 4 sectors. I opened the first one and stopped at the second page. The original failure rate data had been redacted before submission to the regulatory authority. I found both the redacted and unredacted versions and placed them side by side. The components were defective. The failures had been documented internally, and for at least 3 years, regulators had been receiving cleaned versions of these reports. Defective infrastructure components. Already installed. Already in service. Across 4 sectors. And the people responsible had known about every single failure. I sat in that storage unit and understood that this was no longer simply about what had been done to me. This was something considerably worse than what had been done to me. And it had been hidden in the same archive as my own destruction. The following morning, I received a call on the burner from a number I did not recognize. The woman introduced herself as Stella Vega, investigative journalist. She had been following Stratton Group's defense procurement activity for nearly 11 months. A source inside the company had already been in contact with her. The partial evidence she had received described a pattern she had been trying to corroborate for considerably longer than this week. She asked if I would speak to her. I asked how she had obtained the burner number. "I can't tell you," she said. "But the person who gave it to me said to tell you that you are running out of time." She told me the board had been quietly communicating with a contact at the prosecuting authority, applying private pressure for a public arrest. Not because the evidence against me was strong, but because a public arrest would generate a news cycle the company could use to control the story before the contract evaluation closed. If I appeared in handcuffs outside this building before that deadline, the story would be about me, not about them. "You need a solicitor today," Stella said. "Not tomorrow." She connected me that afternoon with Francis, 12 years in corporate fraud law, available on an emergency basis. Francis listened to everything, reviewed every document I sent across, and called me back within the hour. "They've made several significant errors," she said. "The most consequential one is that they appear to have completely underestimated how methodical you are." For the first time in a week, I felt something shift inside me. Something that felt, distantly, like the beginning of a plan. Government investigators questioned me on Thursday afternoon. Francis attended and advised me beforehand: answer every factual question, decline every speculative one, do not fill silences. The session ran for 6 hours. For most of it, one investigator led methodically, returning repeatedly to the transfers, my credentials, my level of system access. Her questions told me clearly that she had been given a complete version of the case against me before I sat down. In the final hour, the second investigator took over. He was not interested in facts. He accused me directly, orchestrating the fraud, embedding it using institutional knowledge, and implicating senior colleagues as deliberate deflection. Each accusation was stated as a conclusion, and he watched my reaction rather than my response. He was reading from a script. Someone had written him a very specific script. Then he opened a folder and slid a document across the table without comment. A building access report. My keycard had been used to enter the main building at 2:11 in the morning on the 9th of November, the night, he said, on which the fraudulent credentials had been installed on the server. Frances placed her hand on my arm before I could speak. I had flown to Frankfurt on the 8th of November for a client meeting. I had not returned until the morning of the 13th. My boarding pass, hotel confirmation, and client meeting records all confirmed it. I had been over the Atlantic when my keycard entered that building. Someone had cloned it. Someone had walked through those doors in my name. Elise found the security footage on Friday evening. Her suspension notice had been issued one day after mine, and the system update hadn't yet reached the archive terminals. The window was narrow. She knew it wouldn't last. She filtered by date and time, the 9th of November, midnight to 3 in the morning. At 12:44, 2 senior executives entered through the service entrance, using keycards they had no legitimate reason to carry at that hour. Behind them, the head of information technology, carrying a laptop bag and a portable drive. They went directly to my office. They were inside for 31 minutes. Elise pressed her phone flat against the screen and recorded 5 clips, capturing every timestamp that mattered. She sent them to me on the burner, closed the archive session, and logged out. 7 minutes later, she sent a second message. It's gone. The entire archive. Every feed from the 9th. I watched it clearly in real time while I was still at the terminal. Someone wiped it the moment I closed the session. The 5 clips on my phone were the only copy left in the world. I called Frances immediately. Send them to me right now, she said. And tell Elise to get somewhere she feels safe. I called Elise back. She did not answer. I told myself it meant nothing. She had probably already left the building. She was probably already on her way home. I pressed send on the clips, sat down on the kitchen floor, and waited. A letter arrived by courier on Saturday morning. The board of Stratton Group requested my attendance at a resolution meeting on Monday at 11 o'clock. The language was measured and conciliatory. An opportunity, the letter said, to address the current situation with mutual benefit and minimal further disruption. Frances read it twice. "They're running out of time," she said. "The contract evaluation closes this week. This is their last attempt to make you sign something before it does." We attended anyway. Refusing would hand them a procedural advantage. Arriving prepared was worth considerably more than staying away. The boardroom had been arranged with precision. 6 board members on one side of the table. A single chair on the other. Within 3 minutes, a document was placed before me. A confession agreement. I would publicly accept sole responsibility for the fraud, receive a negotiated settlement, and be granted immunity from further prosecution. The drafting was careful enough to appear reasonable at first reading. I looked up from the page. Through the glass wall of the conference room, visible in the corridor directly behind the board members, a television crew was setting up. The camera was already pointing at my chair. They had booked the crew before I had even replied to the letter. This was not a resolution meeting. This was a studio set. And I was sitting in the chair they had positioned so that the entire country could watch me confess to a crime I had not committed. I placed the document face down on the table. I opened my bag and placed my phone on the table. Nobody reacted. Phones were routine at meetings. I connected it to the boardroom speaker system using the pairing code I had saved from a presentation given in this very room 8 months earlier. I pressed play. The chairman leaned forward. "Miss Bennett, if we could simply..." Cutlery. Laughter. Wine is being poured. My line manager's voice, relaxed and entirely certain of himself, "She will never see it coming. She still thinks loyalty means something here." The room stopped. What if she pushes back? What if she starts looking at the approvals? A pause. A glass is being set down. She won't have anything left to fight with. I stopped the recording. Nobody moved for several seconds. One board member's hand had gone completely flat on the table. Another had turned away from the group entirely, as though the wall behind him suddenly required his full attention. Then the board member at the far end, a woman who had not spoken once since I entered the room, stood up. She was looking at the chairman, not at me. "You told this board we were managing an internal misconduct matter." Her voice was entirely controlled. "You did not tell us we were parties to a criminal conspiracy." The chairman opened his mouth. She picked up her phone. In the corridor behind the glass, the television crew had begun dismantling its equipment. They had arrived to film my surrender. They were leaving with something else entirely. I called Elise at 7 the following morning. She did not answer. I tried 3 more times over the next 30 minutes. Then I tried the landline at her flat. A neighbor answered, a woman in her 60s, her voice tight with something she was trying to keep controlled. She had called the building manager that morning. The flat above hers had been empty since the previous night. She had heard 2 voices through the ceiling at around 10:30. Then one voice. Then nothing. Elise's front door had been found standing ajar. Her keys were still on the kitchen table, visible through the letterbox. Frances contacted the police. I contacted Stella. At 20 past noon, my phone buzzed with a video message from an unknown number. A roadside budget hotel room. Poor lighting. Elise was on the edge of a bed in the same clothes she had been wearing on Friday, her voice quiet and controlled in the way people's voices are when they are frightened and need you to believe they are not. They know I copied the footage. A car followed me home from the building on Friday night. I didn't notice until I was already on my street. I left before they could get inside. I am all right. Do not try to find me. I'll make contact when it's safe. No location. The message ended. I watched it 4 times. I forwarded it to Frances and Stella. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the wall. 9 years of loyalty to a company that had sent someone to Elise's door. I was done being patient. Stella's article went live at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning. 11 days of her work. 4 days of mine. The headline named Stratton Group. The story covered the fraudulent transfer, the forged credentials, the shell companies connected to Bright's brother-in-law, and the suppressed safety reports concealing defective infrastructure components already in active service across 4 sectors. The audio recording appeared in a full transcript, independently verified before publication. By 8 o'clock, the company's share price had fallen by 29%. By 10, 2 former employees had published open letters on professional networking sites. Both letters were removed within the hour. By then, they had been shared over 40,000 times. Screenshots of the removed posts circulated independently for the rest of the day. Francis called at midday. The Serious Fraud Office has opened a formal investigation. Independent of anything the company was managing internally. They're acting on the procurement discrepancies and the defective components reports simultaneously. That afternoon, a phrase appeared in the comments beneath Stella's article. I saw it for the first time on Stella's screen when we spoke that evening. For words, initially a comment, then a post, then a thread, spreading to other platforms throughout the day until by midnight it was searchable as a standalone term. Justice for Juno. The company's press office issued a statement at 4 o'clock calling Stella's reporting defamatory. 3 more former employees went on record before the statement reached journalists. The press office issued nothing further after that. Bright appeared on live television at 8 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I watched from Francis's office, where I had been working through the Serious Fraud Office's evidence request. He was composed and authoritative, the careful steadiness of a man who had been briefed extensively and had rehearsed each answer until it sounded natural. He described me as a valued former employee who had clearly made decisions she now regretted. He expressed sympathy, measured, precise, designed to land as reluctant rather than cruel, for the pressures that complex financial environments could place on people ill-equipped to navigate them. The interviewer nodded along. At 8:17, she received something through her earpiece. I watched her expression shift. A series of very small adjustments that together described someone quietly recalibrating everything in front of them. She glanced at the tablet placed beside her. Scrolled briefly. Looked up at Bright. I need to draw your attention to something published online in the last few minutes, she said. Stella had released the second recording. Bright's voice. Fully recognizable. Completely unguarded. Recorded at the same executive dinner, 15 minutes earlier in the evening. Bury the liabilities completely before the auditors arrive. I want nothing that contradicts the external submission left on our servers by Friday. The interviewer read a portion of the transcript aloud. Bright's expression did not change immediately. It changed by degrees. A sequence of very small adjustments, each one fractionally further than the last, that described with absolute precision the exact moment a man understands that his career has ended on live television, in front of an audience of millions, with no way to stop it. Officers from the Serious Fraud Office arrived at Stratton Group's headquarters at 5:20 the following morning. I was not inside the building. I was standing on the pavement opposite with Elise, who had come back from the hotel 2 days earlier, after Francis reached her through the police, and Stella, watching in the cold pre-dawn dark as lights came on floor by floor as the team moved through. 3 executives were escorted through the main entrance at 6:30. The first, a board director I recognized by sight. The second, the head of legal, whose name I knew from annual reports. The third came last, and I felt my breath catch before I consciously registered his face. My direct line manager. The man who had sat at a dinner table with a glass of wine and explained to his colleagues, with something approaching amusement, that I would have nothing left to fight with. He was walked to a waiting vehicle with the clipped efficiency of people who do this regularly and feel nothing in particular about it. He did not look across the street. A fourth person emerged from the entrance shortly after 7, not escorted. Not under arrest. But moving with the careful, contained posture of someone who has recently made a statement they cannot take back. Gerald Mercer. He stopped on the pavement. Found me in the small group across the road. Held my gaze for a moment in the early gray light. Then he stepped off the pavement and crossed the street toward me. Gerald Mercer stopped in front of me. He looked older than he had in the car park. Not from time. From the specific weight of a decision made badly and then lived with for longer than he should have. I told them it had gone too far, he said. His voice was steady, but only just. 2 months before, they went ahead with it. I raised it formally. I said the exposure was too great, the plan too cruel, and that if it became public, it would end everything. I waited. They listened politely. Then they went ahead anyway. And by the time I fully understood they were going to, I was too far inside it to walk out cleanly. He paused. So instead I put documents in a storage unit and gave a burner phone to a woman I believed was sharp enough to know what to do with them. He held my gaze. That was the most I was capable of. I know it wasn't enough. He turned and walked back to the car waiting for him. I stood there in the early morning cold with Elise on one side and Stella on the other, and I watched him go. Behind us, through the glass doors of Stratton Group's headquarters, investigators were wheeling the first of what would become dozens of evidence boxes through the lobby. I looked at Elise. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything. There are moments that don't need words. They only need someone who stayed. 7 months later, I stood at the front of a conference room I had never seen before. Kestrel International, one of the largest operational services companies in Europe, had offered me the position of head of ethics and operations 6 weeks after Stella's first article was published. The process had been quiet, careful, and nothing like the ceremony that had almost destroyed me. Frances was in the third row. Elise had arrived early and taken the front seat, the way she always did for anything that mattered. I had prepared remarks. I set them aside. 7 months ago, I said, a group of people spent 8 weeks constructing a plan to use me as a shield. They needed someone credible enough that no one would question the allegation, trusted enough that the fraud would seem plausible, and loyal enough that by the time I understood what was happening, I would already be too publicly implicated to fight back. I let that sit for a moment. They were right about everything except one thing. They assumed that a person who had built a career on meticulous, careful documentation would arrive at the most dangerous moment of her professional life without any. I looked out at the room. The moment they decided I was powerless enough to sacrifice was the exact moment they lost control of everything. The room erupted. In the front row, Elise was crying. Not from sorrow. Not from relief. From the particular, durable joy of watching someone she had believed in, at great personal cost, in a dark corridor on a Friday night, walk through a door that had once been built specifically to stay shut. If this story stayed with you, please leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every single view matters, and so does yours.